Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. Eric Martin had been working at this paper mill for 20 years when he hurt his back while reaching for something on a shelf. He had slipped a number of discs, which meant he would not be able to work again and would be disabled. He was suddenly out of work, and his wife, Shelley Martin, was not working at the time, but she had to get a job when he couldn't. So, even though Shelley hadn't worked in a long time, she was able to get a job through her connections. To get a job in Palmyra, her hometown in Maine. Palmyra was a small town in the country. I mean, there might have been 1,200 people living there. They also had a 17-year-old daughter named Chelsea who didn't want to go, but it was the only place they could afford to live, so they had to. Luckily, Palmyra was so cheap compared to where they had been living that for the same amount of money, they were able to buy a bigger piece of land than where they had lived before. It was a beautiful farmhouse on a lot of land, but it was very far from anywhere else. To get to their long driveway, you had to go down a bumpy access road. Once you were on the property, you could look around and see a very dense forest that almost no one was in. There were no nature trails, just dark, dense forest everywhere you looked. So, even though no one is happy about it, they end up moving into this farmhouse. As they're unloading their truck, Eric picks up one of his many rifles. Eric came from a long line of hunters. Hunting was his favorite thing to do, and he kept a lot of guns. As Eric brings the rifle into the house, Shelley says, "Oh no, we're not keeping the guns in the house. You have a barn, you're going to put your guns in there." This has always been a point of disagreement between them. Shelley didn't feel safe with guns in the house, especially with kids there, so Eric finally says, "Okay, fine. I won't put my guns in the house. I'll put them in the barn." So he and his son Sean, who had come out to help him, went into the barn. They made a very sturdy gun case for all of his rifles, put it in the barn, locked it, and then locked the barn itself. The rifles were completely safe in the barn, but they were not easy to get to. Past that, the first year, Shelley and Eric had a routine where they would drink coffee on the front porch of their farmhouse at the end of the day while looking out at the front yard. It was something they both looked forward to, and they did it almost every night. So, almost a year after they moved in early 2006, Shelley and Eric are having coffee and talking on their front porch when Shelley thinks she sees something in the woods. Now you need to know the layout and how far they are from the woods to get a sense of what they were seeing. Right in front of their porch was a gravel road where they parked their cars. About 20 meters to the left of their house is their barn, and past the barn, straight out from their porch, is a huge open field with no trees or anything else in it. It was like a grazing area for animals. Then, way past the field, there was a line of trees that led to a really dense forest. So the lights she sees are at least a couple hundred meters away, and she said they look like pulsing lights. It didn't look like a car or any other kind of vehicle, and there was no road straight ahead from their porch. Instead, it was just a thick forest where no one should have been. When Eric sees the lights, he thinks right away that someone is poaching on his land, which means that someone is hunting on his land without permission. So, he gets his son Sean, who didn't live with them but was staying the night, to come outside and ask, "Do you think that's a poacher down there at the edge of our tree line?" Sean says, "I don't know, maybe." Eric decides that he wants to go tell this person to leave his property, so he asks Sean to come with him. They thought they would just get to the edge of the property and yell, "This is private property." Even though Eric and Sean are on the edge of the forest, they are pretty sure that the poacher has already left. Even though it's completely dark, they decide to walk a little ways into the woods to make sure they won't get lost. "We'll walk a little ways into the woods and keep yelling, 'This is private property. Leave.'" They'll start walking, but it's a very dense forest with lots of low-hanging branches. It's not easy to walk there, and there aren't any trails or anything like that. They walk about 10 to 15 meters into the woods, and then they hear what sounds like someone walking parallel to them, maybe 15 meters to their left. They both stopped and looked because they didn't want to take a chance that a predator was stopping them. They thought, well, the lights are out, I don't know what animal this is. Let's just leave here after about a month. It was the first nice day of spring, and Nathan, Chelsea's boyfriend, was staying with the family on the farm. I mean that the winter was very dark and sad. This is how Maine winters usually are. So, Nathan and Chelsea decided to go for a walk in the woods that weekend. So, they take the two family dogs and walk across the big field in front of the house into the forest. This is the same area where Sean and Eric were looking for the lights and heard what sounded like an animal close by. So at first, Chelsea has the dogs on leashes, but when they get to the forest, she lets them off their leashes so they can run around and go crazy after being stuck inside all winter. The two dogs start running right away. After about 100 meters, they stop right in front of this big mound that looks like a dirt mound. But when they get closer, they can see that it's more like a den. There are these big pieces of wood that have been leaned together like a lean-to. Moss, dirt, and grass have been put all over the outside, making it look like a very purposefully made mound. In front of it, a round hole has been dug. And the dogs are standing right outside and sticking their heads in this hole to smell it. Nathan and Chelsea look at it and wonder who did it. Is this something hunters do? Is this something a hunter made or something an animal did? It seems too big for an animal to make, but whatever it is, it was made on purpose. So Nathan just kind of looks down into this den, but it's completely dark, and he thinks he hears growling coming from inside the den. So he says, "We've got to go. I don't know what's living in there. We've got to go." He doesn't hesitate. So, they take the dogs, put him back on a leash, and get out of the woods as fast as they can. When Nathan and Chelsea got back to the house, they told Eric and Shelley, and Sean was also there, that they had found a stand of some kind in the middle of the woods, right near the front porch. And that's when Eric and Sean said, "Well, we were out in that same area about a month ago, and we were sure we heard an animal following us." A couple of months later, Eric and Shelley were having their morning coffee on the front porch, and there was a low mist that seemed to cover the whole field. And while they're sitting there, they talk about how strange it was. When they realized they couldn't hear any crickets, animals, or anything else, the conversation about how creepy the place was took a different turn. And because people were out here all the time, it was always busy at night. So, Shelley always had this powerful flashlight with her, and she started looking around the property without knowing what she was looking for. But it was strange that they couldn't hear any animals. But she doesn't see anything after looking over the whole field. So, she puts down her flashlight and starts talking to Eric about whatever they usually talk about over coffee at night. Eric would say in many interviews that when she put down her flashlight, he felt like they were in danger for some reason. He looks out the window, but doesn't see anything. Suddenly, he says, "You know what? We have to go inside, I don't know why." Shelley says, "Come on, let's stay out here for a little while longer. We'll go inside in a few minutes." Eric gets up and says, "No, you have to go inside." He grabs her and tries to push her into the house, but she fights against him. Suddenly, Shelley stops and says, "Did you hear that?" And Eric knew right away that whatever it was the reason he felt like he was in danger all of a sudden. Eric turns around, but it's too dark for him to see anything. Shelley grabs her flashlight and starts looking along the tree line. When she gets to the field and is halfway across it, right in front of them, she stops because there are 3 huge creatures that look like wolves, standing in the middle of the field and staring right at them. So, when she sees 5 animals that look like wolves staring at them from the middle of their field, she asks Eric, "What are those?" And Eric, who is an experienced hunter, doesn't know what to do. He says, "I think they're bears, but they could be wolves. We have to go inside." Shelley is just holding the light when the animals start charging at her so fast that she couldn't keep the light on them. They were already halfway across the field when they went inside, shut the door, and locked it. Then, without saying a word, they went around the whole bottom floor, locking every window and blind and making sure everything was closed. When the 5 animals started running towards Eric and Shelley, it seemed like they were after them. Even after the house was locked up, Eric and Shelley didn't feel safe, so they stood in the middle of their cabin. Eric said, "My guns are in the barn, I can't protect us," and Shelley said, "Whatever you do, don't go out there. We don't know what they are, they could be a bear or a wolf." Then she goes to her daughter's room and wakes her up, saying, "Come here, you've got to see this." They go to the window and kind of stick their heads out because they don't want the creatures to see them. She says, "Look, there are these 5 creatures standing in a row on the gravel." It seemed like they were waiting for them to come out the front door. They just stood there patiently and looked at the house. It did not look at all like an animal would do that. And while she's looking, one of the animals looks up at Shelley through the window. The animal stands on its 2 legs, puts its back legs up, and looks at Shelley. Shelley gasps and trips because the animal is about 8 feet tall. So now Shelley is on the ground looking at Chelsea, and she can't believe what she just saw. It's like her brain can't figure out that this creature hadn't even seen her, because they were barely looking out the window, and that it was so big that it stood on its hind legs. What are they doing sitting in a row outside the house while they wait for us? What's happening? So, Shelley tells Chelsea to go to bed, stay away from her window, and don't leave the room. Shelley then remembers that she hasn't heard her 2 dogs, and she worries that they might be outside. So, she starts quietly walking all around the top floor looking for her dog. She calls to her 2 dogs, but they don't come out. She goes into the master bedroom and finds them hiding in the corner of the room next to each other, looking scared of whatever is outside. Eric was walking up and down the stairs, thinking that he needed to go to the barn and get his guns to protect his family. But he knew that because of his disability, he couldn't move very quickly, and he'd have to unlock the barn and then pull down the gun case and unlock that while being exposed to the animals. So, he thought that the next best thing would be to run outside, get in his truck, and back up to the front door. Then, he could call his wife and daughter outside, have them get in the car, and drive away. So he just walks over to the window, pulls back the blinds, and looks outside. The 5 creatures are no longer sitting on the gravel path in front of the house. He doesn't know where they are, but they aren't there. So, he shuts the blinds and says, "I don't know where they are, and it's too dangerous to go outside." He starts walking around, and when he turns around to look, he sees all 5 of them back in the field where they were first seen. They are still facing the house, but he can see them because the moon has come out and lit up the field. He thinks, okay, if I just keep an eye on them, I might be able to open the door, run out, get the car, and back up without them seeing me. So, he opens the door and goes to the front porch without telling Shelley, where he sees them in the field. He can see them well, so he walks down the steps and makes his way to his truck, which is about 10 meters away, as quietly as he can. And as he gets closer to his truck, he keeps an eye on the animals in the field. They haven't moved, so it looks like they don't know he's there. When he gets to the driver's side of his truck, he has his keys out and is kind of fumbling to hit the unlock button. His motion sensor light goes on, and he's so scared out there that he drops his keys because he's so startled. The first thing he does is look towards the field, and he sees that one of the 5 creatures is now standing on its hind legs and looking at him directly. He gets inside and slams the door just as he hears them crossing the gravel in front of the house. He then hears them run onto the porch and start running around the wraparound porch. He is so afraid that he can't even look in the window, so he ducks down to hide. Shelley, who is upstairs, can hear everything going on, so she yells up to Eric, "What's going on?" "Stay up there, Shelley, stay up there," he says. Chelsea, everyone is just standing there, frozen, knowing that these things are on the other side of the house, walking along his wraparound porch. After a while, he hears the footsteps of these things leaving the porch and going back onto the gravel area. At some point, he sticks his head up and looks, and all 5 of them are just sitting there, facing the house, waiting for them to come out of the house. So he runs up the stairs to where Shelley and Chelsea are, and they are so scared that they decide they need to call the police. If nothing else, the police will come and their car might scare these things away. But when Shelley answered the phone, she said that what really scared them was something on their property. In fact, there are 5 of these things running around outside their property, and a police officer is there right away to deal with it. He says, "Okay, but are you sure it's not a moose? Are you sure it's not a bear?" And then she finally says, "No, please just come over here." And he says, "Listen, Mom, just shut your door and windows, and I'm sure everything will be fine." And that's where the call ends, leaving them on their own. The family felt powerless, and Eric, in particular, was very upset that he couldn't protect his family. He doesn't have a weapon and can't get to his car, so he and the others are stuck. So, they decided that the only thing we could do is lock ourselves in the house. So, they put heavy furniture in front of all the doors and windows for the next 30 minutes. They tried to block everything as best they could. They got knives for the kitchen, and an axe to chop wood with as they went upstairs. They locked themselves in the master bedroom with their weapons and their dogs. They sat down on the bed and decided that the only thing they could do was wait until morning. They put up walls around their house. They would occasionally look out the window and see the 5 animals just sitting on the gravel in front of their house, waiting for them. When they finally went upstairs and locked themselves in that room, they heard the creatures move off the gravel, and at least a couple of them walk onto the porch and start pacing around it. Other than the sounds of these creatures, it was completely quiet, and it was clear that they were talking to each other because they were bumping into walls and then howling at each other. It was clear that they were trying to plan some kind of attack on the family by talking to each other. Now, the house was set up so that the second floor had a roof, and the first floor was a bit wider than the second floor and had a roof of its own. After a while, the creature stopped walking on the porch. It left the porch, and there was nothing but silence until they heard it jump onto the first roof. The scary thing about this is that if you walked around the roof, you could look into the windows on the second floor. They were lying there and would occasionally look out their window. There were windows on both sides of the room they were in, but there was only a thin curve between them and the window. So, sometimes these creatures would walk by their windows, stop, put their paws up on the window, and look inside, but there was a very thin sheet between them and the glass, so they couldn't see the creature and the creature couldn't see them all night. They are paying attention to these animals running around. And sometimes they hear really loud scratching, which sounds like they figured out something and are trying to dig into the house. But even though they did this for a whole night, they never did break the glass. They never made it inside. As the sun rose in the morning, the creatures jumped off the roof and ran away. For about an hour, they didn't hear anything outside. Now that the sun was up, they felt safe again. So, they left their room, went downstairs, and finally opened it. All over their property, they found big footprints with big claws at the end, which showed that big animals had been there. They found tufts of hair that had gotten caught on fence posts. What was even scarier was that they found all these points on the house, especially on the second floor. When they were walking on that roof, they could see where the animals had tried to dig into the house. The side of the house had these deep scratches, and the front door had been scratched open. I mean, it was clear that whatever these things were, they were trying to get into the house, but they had just failed. This was such a scary experience for the family that they sold the house and moved right away. Since then, they haven't had anything like it happen again. So, what do you think those animals were? Were they bears, wolves, or something else? Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll get back to you. So get in there and tell me what you think is going on. If you liked this video and haven't already, please waterboard the like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on all notifications.